Name, image, and likeness. We had this on our scheduling board for a while because this is not even a year, but we have certainly seen the impact of name, image, and likeness. It played a huge role in the conversation around the most recent recruiting cycle, and it's provided a lot of fun. When we look at name, image, and likeness deals that make us smile, make us laugh, then it's also created a little bit of angst throughout the coaching, university president, and athletic director community. And I thought that with the NCAA looking to, if you are in favor of player compensation and the wild, wild west name, image, and likeness world that we live in, then you are probably a little bit concerned that the NCAA is going to do a full review of the impact on student athletes. In a news release, the board cited concerns about potential violation of NCAA recruiting rules, the representation for athletes that broker the deals for NIL deals, the booster involvement, as well as schools being involved in potentially arranging deals for incoming players. Of course, we have the very good story from David Ubben about the NIL collective at Tennessee. We have all kinds of, what was it? Nick Saban came up at SEC Media Days. He said that Bryce Young's got it up to $1 million. He just sort of guessed off the top of his head. But I wanted to start with, do you think that we, after 1 year of having this, name, image, and likeness, you're celebrating players being able to profit off their name, image, and likeness in ways that would have been violations? Do you think that opportunity for players is on the chopping block right now? Is it possible that the NCAA rolls this thing back with enough pressure from outside influence?
No.
Okay.
I mean, they could try, but it's just so ripe for an antitrust lawsuit.
Didn't they kind of try? Because they looked into the two deals, the BYU walk-ons deal, which you talk about the worst one possibly from a PR perspective. BYU. You could try to go after. And then they went after the Miami Hurricanes, the guy with the gym who said, hey, every player on the team, gets that deal. There's no way. They just can't. They've lost so much over the past year, 5 years. They just don't hold any weight. And I think these programs are like, what, now the programs are almost like daring them. Like, what are you going to do? And I don't think they're going to do anything. The court of public opinion has already spoken, and I know it shouldn't matter, but also the courts have spoken as well. So they really don't have anything. I thought that was what was comical though, because even when on July 1st, when NIL went public and the states, okayed it, and then the NCAA had to respond, they said, okay, but under these circumstances. And they said very specifically it wasn't supposed to be about player inducement. And we all know that's all it's about. That's all it's about. And the schools are basically just flaunting it in their face. I don't think there's anything they can do about it.
I say let the market sort it out. Like if some schools want to pay all this money to the players and probably get a terrible return on their investment and keep doing that, okay, cool. Let them. I mean, at some point there's going to be like can't think of the correct financial term here, or economic term, but at some point there's going to be like an equilibrium breaking point where they're going to realize, wait a minute, why am I giving this kid $1 million?
A market correction, because think about if you're, and I don't know the specifics of the deals, and there probably were multiple deals. Let's just say, for instance, you're an Ohio State booster and you're thinking, oh, I can get Quinn Ewers to come to play for the Buckeyes, and you offer him, equity in your company, and you pay him whatever cash, and then he's there for 1 year and leaves, and you don't get any return on your investment whatsoever. And even more so, it wasn't because he wasn't any good. Like, he could go light it up for Texas. Like, the next time around, the next player, do you think you're as likely to offer an equity stake in your kombucha company or your cash offer? I think that's what you're talking about. Like, there's going to be, because these are, hopefully, it can be irrational, but hopefully there's smart businessmen and women that are, ponying up this money. They're going to say, well, hold on a second. Let's make these shorter term deals. Let's not make them quite as lucrative and maybe incentive driven. There's going to be ways around this, I think, where what you're talking about, I think it'll settle. I mean, it's the wild, wild west. And it's like, it's like you were talking about. I mean, think about the internet tech bubble, which took place in the late 90s. And he just bought any company that went public and it was going to go up. And that's what it felt like. Everybody's like, oh, it's a 5-star. Here's the cash. And I think it'll reset. I think it'll come back.
I actually think the money will only increase. For a couple reasons. One, those guys who give Quinn Ewers some equity stake in their kombucha company, they did so because they're very competitive and they want Ohio State to win. Those guys who have enough money to play in that pool, but not enough money to have an ownership stake in an NFL team, are going to continue to try to play in that pool. It's why Auburn very seriously considered giving Brian Harsin an $18 million buyout after 1 year. I don't necessarily think it's fair, and I don't think Tom was doing this, but like if you kind of want to extrapolate it, we talk about, hey, like not getting a return on investment from players. There's many more coaches who are paid a lot more money than the players are, who are not delivering, return on investment. I thought David Nubbett had a really good article on The Athletic about this. His Tennessee guy he interviewed said it takes about $10 million to put together a good recruiting class right now, and in the future they're going to try to get $20 or $25 million to put together a class. Now, as I read that, I thought that's over 4 years. That's not $25 million up front. But I'll ask you guys this. Find me a sport that brings in billions where the coaching staff makes more than the roster. Anywhere close, right? Like Belichick makes 15, and most of these NFL coaches make under 10, and the best quarterbacks make what, 35? I think Mahomes makes 45, I read. Like the best players in these other sports make 3x, 5x. I mean, baseball, they make like 10x of what the coaches make. And I'm not trying to imply that we should have players making 10x of what coaches make in college, because I do think that they're a little bit less proven. But it's not at all crazy if you're a 5-star quarterback to say, hey, I want $2 million a year per year, right? Like there's only so many of them. And if you hit, he's easily worth that to the guys paying in terms of their return of winning games. And if he doesn't, that's kind of priced in.
What about the avenues? What about the avenues for compensation? Because you just used the NFL, and that is the NFL franchise paying both the coach and the player. Our world now is that the player compensation is coming from outside the university, while the university is paying the coach salary. Is like that disconnect makes it even tougher to set any kind of market in my eyes. Like that's why you get the like 25 million for the recruiting class kind of talk, because we are talking about an entirely different unbudgeted pool of money from people, like you're saying, Bud, who are competitive and clearly have this kind of cash to be able to throw around. Like, does the university, does college football need those two systems to be aligned? Because you said it brings in billions, and it does bring in billions, but it doesn't bring in billions for the boosters. This is a bad deal for boosters to get in on NIL stuff. Like the boosters are only profiting in feelings and emotions and happiness.
Ego, yeah.
That's the ego. That's the only thing the boosters get back from this investment, while the universities are the ones that are actually getting the billions from the media rights deals and the performance of the college football players.
That's true. In some ways, they're organizing these as charities, though, which could run afoul of some IRS type stuff, but maybe not, depending on who you do it with. Chip, I think you bring up a really good point, though. At a certain point, if the money gets to the size, if you can figure out the Title IX component, do you want to bring in NIL in-house, kind of like Ohio State did, right? Wouldn't you rather have, if you weren't going to get hit with Title IX stuff and some liability stuff, wouldn't you rather have more control, or at least be more informed of it? Certain states can't do this right now with the current state laws. Like where Danny and I live, you definitely can't bring NIL in-house and have the school manage it. But I think that's what Ohio State did, might be a first step as some of these laws change. I don't know that they really want separate booster groups running this. They still want the boosters' money, to be sure, but I think the schools will probably want more control. And I think that is probably one of the next steps that we're going to take to likely having these guys be classified as employees, by the way, down the road. Like there's a couple things happening right now that I think we're fairly close to that going down.
Yeah, and that's the one thing too that I feel like it's rarely brought up, even though we cover college football. What happens to the academic side of all this for these guys? Because forever the payment that they've received has been a scholarship, which I feel like has too often been tossed aside by some people as being worthless. I think it's worth a lot because college is expensive. But at what point, like if I'm paying a kid $2 million to come to play quarterback for me, the hell do I need to give him a scholarship for? You know what I mean? And it's at that point, if that kid's no longer on scholarship and he's technically a walk-on making $2 million a year, why does he need to go to class? He doesn't need to meet any of the academic requirements that come with that scholarship. So at what, like you're saying, buddy, becomes the employee. But what's that going to look like? Are these kids in the future going to be still required to go to certain classes and meet certain academic requirements to stay in the school? Or are they just going to be hired contractors who play for our football team and give us, advertising?
And if you want to go to class, you can.
Yeah.
Sure. Given the two things. One, I was reading Fangraph's top 100 prospects this morning, and shout out Kevin Goldstein and those guys, except for the cheating Astros part. Not one in those 100 guys did I at all read anything about, hey, this kid's good at school or he's not good at school, he was a bad student. I agree, a scholarship, if you're actually getting a good education, is valuable, but too often these guys are herded into majors that don't really produce much value in terms of degrees. They're not able to really pick what classes they want to go to. I know Danny was, or was it Danny or Andy Staples? One of the guys was talking about they didn't get to pick their classes. They just got handed their schedule on the plane on the way home from the Sugar Bowl. So I agree with you that the scholarship is valuable in certain circumstances, but I think a lot of these teams that are playing at the highest level, the scholarship is not all that valuable.
I mean, more in the fact that the athletic department still has to pay for that scholarship.
But is it a real cost, or is it just like
it comes out of their revenue? It comes out of the revenue.
But they're not actually spending that money in their university.
But
it's a spreadsheet cost.
It goes from the athletic department to the university. Athletic departments pay for those scholarships. That's why they have their own separate budgets compared to the school. And that's why all that other money goes to putting water slides inside the facility, because they can't turn a profit.
You are going to break the brains of university presidents who are currently sitting at Power 5 universities if you tell them that the college football players are basically going to be serving the same function as your sports information director, as the office staff, as the graduate, or not graduate assistants, as the offensive line coach, because that is a future that, Tom, like as you're mentioning, is possible. But that's where we start to barrel towards like true breakaway, where some universities might be willing to say, you know what, like we are just going to create a work world where all of these 18 to 22-year-olds, their job is college football. And I mean, look, at that point, you're probably breaking away from the NCAA. At that point, you probably don't have the same hour limits on practices. You don't have the same hour limits on how much time you can spend with these guys. Like at that point, you really are just barreling towards universities fielding true minor league college football teams.
Yeah, and let's put ourselves in the minds back when we were 18 or 19. So like, not necessarily, not like Danny on scholarship playing football, but just 18, 19-year-olds in school. And we've got a job in which we're paying, we're getting 6 figures, maybe even 7 figures a year. Some of us would still be motivated to go to class because we think long-term, but most 18, 19-year-olds aren't thinking like that. We're going to be like, well, F this. I'm going to stay home, play Halo. Why the hell am I going to class? I'm making $500,000 a year. I'm going to class to get the job I already have. So it's like there's no motivation for these kids to keep going to class. So it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, it's going to become professionalized. It's pretty much what the end game is.
I agree with that. The only motivation for a lot of these kids to go to class right now is just to stay eligible. Right. It's not actually to get the degree. Now, that's not all kids, but for a lot of them who are trying to go pro in football, that really is the motivation, right? It's an A or C. There's no difference. Just pass me. I do think there's an interesting quote from a Dennis Dodd article from January I wanted to bring up. This is from Bubba Cunningham, the athletic director at North Carolina. He said, quote, "I think we're probably 2 to 3 years away from having a different relationship with our student athletes." He's entering his 27th year as an AD. It won't necessarily be the student in the university. It may be employee-employer. And then he went on to talk about, like, there's different ways you can do this that probably don't run afoul of Title IX. He's like, look, we have all kinds of employees. Like graduate assistants are technically employees. Analysts are employees. So they don't necessarily have to be the the employee status that you and I think. But I think this is probably coming sooner than we think. They just filed another labor complaint with the NLRB out there in California, trying to loop in USC and UCLA. So the NLRB, National Labor Relations Board, by the way, if you guys are watching at home and don't know, they went USC and UCLA, USC private, UCLA public, to try to basically get them dual as a joint venture under the conference umbrella, so that they can actually impact public schools as well as private. And we want to talk about, like, hey, how do you put a salary cap on college football? The way you do it is you collectively bargain for one. That's why the NFL has a salary cap. That's why the NHL and the NBA and those guys have caps. They've collectively bargained for it. Danny, you were a part of that process. You're definitely not going to get away with having a salary cap on anything if the other side has no bargaining power and no seat at the table. So if you want to kind of get to a spot where here's how the money is capped, I'm not saying we will, but realistically, that's kind of the only way you get there, I think, right now. Because any other just blanket rule that gets thrown out, you're putting cap on what people you're still insisting are not employees can make. That's just going to get torn up in court.
They've had a salary cap for 70 years.
Yeah.
It's been zero, right? I mean, that's what it's been. The Brett Kavanaugh judgment in the Alston case, he shredded any hope of anybody thinking that the amateur model was going to exist. And I've been a believer in it. I remember going on with my old guy, Ryan Russillo, who we had the radio show with. And he asked me probably a year or two ago, he was like, well, when's the money too much? Because I would always say, it's expensive. It's expensive to run all of college athletics. It's not just football. It's not just basketball. It's every sport that's out there. But the numbers that you're hearing that are coming out, I'm like, okay. Like, I've kind of thrown in the towel and been like, there is enough money and then some to go around where you could make this happen. So I'm very curious though, Bud, do you have any, because I feel like you know something that you don't want to say. Like, if you say, like, what do you think this would look like? Where does it come from? Like, what makes it different from a school playing a coach's salary versus playing all the players' salary? Because he doesn't have to go to class. Is that, like, wouldn't it be just easy to say, yeah, you can go to class if you want to, but then how many kids are going to go is right?
I think they would still make them go to class, to be honest, just because it preserves some of that traditional structure. I think if you're going to get university presidents to go along with it, you're probably wanting to preserve that. One of the things they have to figure out is the Title IX issue, right? But does that actually
explain that? Like, what is this? Because I get that all the time, and I know that was a big one, but I would say the counter would be that, what is that? I thought that was equal access to facilities, scholarships. But if it's different, like, how do you justify Nick Saban making, 10 million plus and the women's basketball coach making $1 million? Like, how is that? Like, in his pool, I'm guessing the pool for his coaching staff is different than the women's softball team, which is really good at Alabama, but I don't think they're anywhere close. So why would it be so much different?
So it's because of the educational aspect, right? Like, you're not giving Nick Saban an educational opportunity or the women's softball coach an educational opportunity. The students, they kind of tied in to that, right? The educational opportunity, which is why I'm interested. If you make them employees, is that an in run around Title IX, right? Like, if you make your Rev Sports employees, and that complaint to the NLRB is not just football. It's also men's basketball and women's basketball, the sports that it claims make money. I'd be interested to see how much money, some of those sports make other than football across the country, but certainly a lot of them on the men's basketball tournament make a pretty good amount. So there's some issues you have to figure out there. But I do think that this is probably coming this way. Otherwise, it's very, very Wild Westy.
If you have players becoming employees, or that relationship eventually becoming a employer-employee relationship, does NIL still even need to exist, or is that just another shock to the NIL market?
I mean, NIL will always exist. But if you start paying guys through the school, you don't need to give them fake. fake's not the right word. They're using
We're live on YouTube.
It's more endorsement based, right?
Right,
yeah.
Like actual value of endorsement, as opposed to currently NIL is your actual value of endorsement plus your enjoyment value to whatever millionaire booster wants to see his team win, right? Or whatever guy wants to get $50 a month charged to his credit card through one of these collectives. So I think we will always have NIL, but it's just endorsements like it is in any other sport that pays its players, right? Like Danny, you didn't get like your endorsement value was basically commensurate with your actual marketing value.
Right.
I also think you'll see far less money spent in facilities because you don't need to fake like you're losing money like you are right now to maintain your nonprofit status. Like right now, they do this great spend down, like, oh, we got to upgrade these facilities. And everybody's like, oh, we need to upgrade ours because they upgraded theirs. And you have this big facilities war. In the NFL, nobody's like, hey, man, I don't want to sign with Cincinnati because they don't have an indoor facility, right? Nobody gives a damn about that. It's like, how many commas are you going to put in my check? Who am I going to be playing with? And do I like living in the city?
Steelers
Basically.
and Pitt share the same building.
Does Pittsburgh still sign free agents?
Yes.
Right. Because like they're like, oh, we need this building for recruiting. No, you don't. I mean, you in the current structure, sure. And nobody wants to live in like a totally rundown place. But realistically, that is not the most important thing. It's only the most important thing because you have a cap of 0 right now on what you can pay your quote unquote non-employees. And so you have to always do this great spend down to show that you're losing money overall so you can maintain your nonprofit status.
I don't know. Like one way I always felt, and I don't know how it applies now, but I always wondered if this would be an easy workaround that the schools never did, both for NIL and just academics and everything. When you go to college, you choose a major. The major you choose is in line with what you intend your employment to be, career to be after you leave school, whether it ends up being that or not. But like if you want to be a lawyer, you go to law school. If you want to be a doctor, you go to medical school. You major in the subjects that you need to major in to get into those. Why schools just never made football a major or basketball a major? That would have been a complete and easy workaround to me. Like, I'm going to school and I'm majoring in football and my classes are football. I go to practice. I go to the weight room. I do all this. I want to professionally play football. And I feel this school is the best one to prepare me for that and the classes they have. I mean, I think the reason why they never did that was because the presidents of the schools would feel like it would tarnish the university's reputation.
It's a little too on the nose.
Yeah. But like, if they would have just made those changes like 20 years ago, I think they're avoiding a lot of the problems they're facing right now.
A lot of the problems. If the NCAA had been so stubborn and just dug in the sand and made a few concessions, we could have avoided all this, and they could have kept their hand in the cookie jar and done everything they wanted to if they just would have given a little bit.
Because not everybody that goes to law school becomes a lawyer, just like not everybody that goes to football school becomes a football player.
And if you're a football major, doesn't guarantee you're going to get a football job.
No,
when you're done with college,
right?
You might end up blogging.
Yeah, you can. Hey, come on down. You can join the rest of us that barely got out of university and wound up blogging. All right, couple fun ones right here. So we've discussed and referenced the NIL collective. How much do you think is an appropriate cost for a recruiting class now?
How good do you want to be?
That's
what are the kids 40 times?
Like, what are you pulling together? You're in charge of the Cover 3 collective for our university. How much money do you think is like, where do you draw the line between that's too much, and not on a per person, but if we believe that there's a mythical $25 million number, and if we know that there's a $10 million number, where do you think is an appropriate use of funds based on the current market as we know it?
By the way, back to the signing conversation real quick. I think the real reason Jimbo was so angry about the $25 million rumor is that if you allow that to be out there, the kids look around like, wait, I know what I got. How does that add up to 25? And they get mad about a fake number. You know what I'm saying? Like, wait, if you guys spend 25, how am I only getting, $750 a year? That doesn't make any sense. I'm like the number 5 player in this class. So I think that was really important for him to quash that, even though they're not directly involved. Like, clearly If I'm a player and I'm in that class and I hear you spent 25 million, I'm
And I only
calling like,
got
hey, we're
500. Yeah.
exactly.
Well, what do we think the going rate is? Like
5-star
and
defensive lineman, I think, is getting $1 million a year.
What about a 5-star quarterback?
Probably 2.
Yeah.
Which, people are, and I'm sure a lot of listeners are like, holy cow, I can't believe that type of money. If you look at the Major League Baseball draft, when you're drafted out of high school, you're a top 10 pick. You're getting that kind of money.
Yeah. I would
And how many
follow
players people can
Danny's
name
idea.
those guys.
Not many. I could, and Bud can because he reads top 100 articles on Fangraphs, but not many other people could. But I like Danny's idea as far as how much I would be spending on my recruiting class. How much do I pay my coaching staff? Cutting that in half.
Yep.
And then I'm adding about 15 million to that. And that's how much I'm paying my recruiting class. And my coaches will take that pay cut because now that I'm just buying the players, they don't have to recruit as much. Like their jobs are going to become a little bit easier because you could just say, hey, we play football here and we offer you $750K a year to come play if you want.
Right. That's where the correction, that might be where the correction comes. When you think about it, like maybe people schools get tired of paying their coaches. They figure out a way to get the money to the collectives, and then you can actually get the money to the players that matter the most. And some coach is going to be like, sure, I'll take the pay cut, but put me at do a Harbaugh deal. If I win the Big Ten, if I win a conference championship, if I make the playoffs, give me a couple $1 million bonus, and you're going to be playing, because you can rig the system. There is a talent advantage that you're going to have almost every time,
Also, do you think there's any chance, and I'm getting off topic here, so I apologize, but it's along the same lines.
It's the offseason.